everybody. This is Steve Fish. I'm the Executive Director at Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today called Research Directions. This is the beginning of a webinar series that we're hosting in cooperation with CBERN, the Canadian Business Ethics Research Network. And before I go too much further, if we're having any challenges with audio or sound, please use the chat feature or the Q&A feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx window right now, and that'll help us troubleshoot as we go. There's a little bit of reverberation in this room. We're in a fairly fancy room, as they say in the sound business, so please bear with us there. So just very quickly, just a little bit about our relationship with CBERN and this series before we get into the core event itself. We've been working with CBERN over the last couple of years to build off of their 2014, well, their winter research meeting. This will be the 2014 research meeting, where it's an opportunity for academics to present condensed papers to both faculty and non-faculty advisors for feedback. And CBSR saw this as an opportunity in partnership with CBERN to provide an industry audience for some net new research that's coming out of the PhD clusters across the country, and specifically those connected to CBERN. CBSR tends to connect people in both the NGO community and the business community, but also in academia. We see that there's a really important piece missing there sometimes, where the new research isn't being as widely seen in the industry community, and industry, frankly, doesn't have the same opportunity to comment and provide advice as that research is maturing, which is why we've structured these sessions in partnership with CBERN. So this is our third year doing this, or?
Nope, it's our second.
It's only our second year. See, it's so comfortable. We thought it'd been lasting a lot longer than that. So we intend to keep doing these year over year. Is that loud enough? Can people still hear me on the phone? We got one feedback that I was not speaking loudly enough, which is not usually a comment I get. Okay, so moving right along.
Yeah. I guess with that being said, we should, if Hilary wants, if you'd like to say a few words.
Hey, hi, it's Hilary Martin. I'm the Research and Outreach Coordinator for the Canadian Business Ethics Research Network. It was great to work with Stephen on this initiative over the past 2 years. And the slide that you see up now is a bit of the way that we take these in-person, cross-sectoral, multidisciplinary meetings focused on works in progress, research that's ongoing by top quality PhDs working in business and economic ethics at institutions across Canada, and do a couple of things with it. We convene these groups so they get really good feedback to help improve their papers, both from an industry perspective and from a peer perspective and from top intellectual leaders. We create kind of executive summaries of their research that makes it a bit easier for people to engage with. So that's there on the left. And then through this webinar series, we try to broaden that engagement. So take it out of the room, the in-person meeting, and widen it out to promote further engagement and development of those ideas. In the meantime, there are the typical academic things that are going on, so posting things on working paper series online that are kind of more academic focused. But I will say that we've had really great success with this model in generating high quality research that has been published in top tier journals from our out of our PhD cluster. So thanks a lot for the CBERN and the group here today for helping continue this tradition and encouraging intellectual development in Canada on these issues. I do want to just do a quick call out to the collaborators you'll see up there on a connections grant that was successful that we applied for through the Social Science and Humanities Research Council. And also thanks to our supporting partners, CBSR, Canadian Centre for Ethics and Corporate Policy, York University Schulich, and Export Development Canada.
Thank you, Hilary.
Thanks.
So today's session is focused on women on boards and firms, and specifically sustainability performance and investigation of large firms in both U.S. and Canada. This particular study explores the relationship between gender diversity and sustainability performance in large firms. In particular, what the researcher attempts to find out is to what extent do women serving on board of directors in a firm improve its social and environmental performance measures. And our researcher today is Jing Liu. She's a PhD candidate in accounting in the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary. She's particularly interested in including financial accounting, risk management, corporate social responsibility, and sustainable development into her research. And she is currently serving as the PhD cluster co-leader for CBERN and is a member of the Transatlantic Doctoral Academy on Corporate Responsibility, TADA. She's also the winner of the 2013 Robert Bertram Doctoral Research Award issued by the Canadian Foundation of Governance Research. Very exciting to have you with us, Jing, and I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation. Thank you. She's just
to share my one.
Yep, you're all set. You're ready to go.
Okay. I hear some of my own song.
Sorry, what was that?
She's hearing some feedback. Bear with us, everybody. Jing's just adjusting the sound on her computer. She was getting a little bit of feedback just now, so bear with us 1 second while we just correct the audio. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, it's great now. Thank you for the opportunity. I was just adjusting my computer settings. So my research is mainly about women on board and companies' sustainability performance. So what motivates me to study this project is that gender diversity is still rare in the boardroom. We've heard about this conversation for a pretty long time, but when I did the research in 2012, I still find quite disappointing results. Like in the U.S., only 16.6% of the Fortune 500, the biggest companies, they hire women directors, while in the workforce, it's much higher percentage. In Canada, it's also quite disappointing with figures, like only 14.5, but in UK, similar stories. So that motivates me to study this project. And based on the research, we know there are 3 approaches to increase women's presence on board, like the coercive one, like in the Norway, Sweden, so they just put some quota. So they say, like, big companies, they have to put certain percentage of women on board. And in Canada and the US, we use another liberal approach, so-called. It's voluntary appointment, so there's no quota. And in UK, they use the collaborative one, which is from both ways. So in the new world, we know that firms' financial performance alone is not sufficient. There's a big talk by 2 famous professors in Harvard. They talk about Procter and Kramer. They talk about creating the shared value. So for the company, if they want to survive for a long term, social responsibility and social disclosure is quite important. But in the literature, most of the research, they talk about women on board linked to financial performance, or CSR linked to financial performance. There's very limited number of research talking about women on board and the link with companies' social and environmental performance. So my research tried to fill in the blank here in this research, and I think I can make some contribution to both the academia world and the professional world. So my research question is, are companies' social and environmental performance related with women directors? So the major contribution of my paper is there are two indexes. The first is I use both the social and environmental indexes. I use a data set of 3,358 observations in 4 years, and I find that between 2009 and 2012, and I use data to compare US and Canada. In addition, I use 3 research methods, which is ordinary square, random effect, and generalized method of moments. So both methods, they have some strengths and weakness. So that's why I decided to use 3 to make the results pretty strong. And I also test critical mass theory and the causality issue. So that's basically the contribution. I have 2 hypotheses. So the first one is having women on board serving on firms is positively related to firms' social performance. The second one is having women on board is positively related with firms' environmental performance. So as I said, my research is 3 years, 4 years, majorly big US and Canada firms. And in my sample, the US and the Canada firms, they have very lower percentage, like in US only about 14%, and in Canada only 10%. So how do I measure social and environmental performance? I used a database called the Sustainalytics, which is a consulting firm. They give social and environmental ratings to big companies almost all over the world. So I just got their data and use it as my dependent variable. For my independent variable, gender diversity, I use the so-called Blau index. It measures firms' diversity. For example, like if there are 10 board members and then 50% is women, 50% is men, then the Blau index will be 0.5, which is the maximum. And if all the board members are either male or female, then it will be the lowest for the diversity index. So then I use a few control variables. So it's very common to include those financial information and corporate governance information in this kind of research. I use the corporate governance score from the Sustainalytics database, and I also test firms' R&D expense, firms' other financial related measures like capital intensity, leverage, liquidity, like their sales, their return on assets, the size, and the firm's industry. So I just want to control for those common things and to see if the woman makes a difference in addition to those common financial measures. So I want to eliminate whether it's the firm's characteristic or the gender diversity actually makes a difference in firms' social and environmental performance. So as I said, I use 3 statistic models just to try to make the results stronger. And in addition to that, I also tested something called critical mass. The concept is from the literature, they found that 3 females on board, or if the women occupy 30% of the boardroom seats, will actually make a difference. So the previous literature, they mainly tested the relationship between the critical mass and the firm's financial performance. So I want to see like whether the same thing also works in the relationship between gender diversity and the firm's social and environmental performance. So I borrow this critical mass idea and try to test it in my own research. So I pulled the I put some codes like whether it's one woman, two women, it's definitely variable. And then I also tested 4 types of board, like uniform board, they have no woman, and school board, they have 1 woman, but it's less than 20%, and tutor board, less than 20%, but more than 20%, but less than 40%, and also balance board, at least 40%. So that's how I test the critical mass. And I also use another method called propensity score matching, with balanced firms characteristics. And so I have 2 groups of firms. One group, they have women directors, and the other group they don't have. And all their firm characteristics are similar, like they have roughly similar return on assets, they have similar size. So I test the difference between the 2 groups to see if their social or environmental performance is different or not. So that's propensity score matching. And my results shows that by using 3 statistical methods, I found a positive links between women directors and firms' social and environmental performance. In the full sample, which is a mixed sample of Canadian and U.S. firms, and also it's in U.S. firms, in U.S. sample, but I didn't find the results in Canadian sample. For the critical mass, I also find strong results in the whole sample, which includes both countries. I find the critical mass in U.S. sample, but not in the Canadian sample. And for the propensity score matching, similar, I found strong results in whole sample in the U.S. sample, but not Canadian sample. So I guess it might have something to do with the size of the Canadian sample, or maybe there's some difference between U.S. and Canada, which I will explore later in next stage of my research. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
And thank you for your presentation. That was incredibly detailed. I have to admit, some of the mathematics was a little above my head, but that's incredible. So now we move into the respondents portion of the presentation. So I want to take a moment and just introduce the respondents. And for once in CBSR history, we actually have all of the respondents in the same room. Normally we're connected across the country, so thank you to all 3 of you. So who we have with us? We have Kathy Gallagher-Louise, who's the Director of Community Partnerships and Knowledge Services with the Canadian Institute of Diversity and Inclusion. And Kathy is an experienced diversity and inclusion professional and a certified intercultural trainer and coach with over 25 years of experience in human resources and project management roles within corporate, government, and nonprofit organization. Kathy specifically leads the CIDI's research portfolio and is the author of the report, What Gets Measured Gets Done, Performing the Return on Investment of Diversity and Inclusion. She also helps partner organizations and clients develop strategic D&I and corporate competence strategies, programs, and tools. Thanks for joining us today, Kathy. We also have Leanne James, who's the Senior Vice President, Canadian Board Diversity Council. Welcome, Leanne. The CBDC is the leading Canadian organization advancing diversity on Canada's boards. Their goal is to improve the diversity of Canada's corporate boards by increasing the representation of women, visible minorities, Aboriginal peoples, including First Nations, Inuit, Métis, persons with disabilities, and members of the LGBT community. They're founding and corporate members of organizations that are leaders in diversity and corporate governance in the private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. And finally, last but not least, we have Michelle de Cordova, who's the Director of Corporate Engagement and Public Policy at NEI Investments. Michelle is responsible for corporate engagement within environment, social, and governance services teams at NEI Investments, home of ethical funds. She took the lead recently on NEI Investments' April 16, 2014 submission to the Ontario Securities Commission regarding women on boards and in senior management, proposed amendments to Form 58-101F1, Corporate Governance Disclosures of National Instrument 58-101 Disclosure of Corporate Governance Practices. So I think we've got a pretty stacked team here to respond, ask Jing some great questions, and hopefully kick off some discussion with those of you that are joining us via the webinar. So who would like to start? Does anyone want to, do I have to point fingers, or are we going to, Michelle?
I got pointed at.
You got pointed at.
Hi everyone, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to comment on this paper, which is very interesting. to us at NEI and Ethical Funds, we've got a great interest in the topic of diversity in the context both of corporate responsibility, diversity being the right thing for businesses to do, but also diversity as a value driver in companies, something that will increase corporate value over the long term, and as well as bringing up diversity and engagement with companies in our funds. Diversity does feature in our proxy voting guidelines for voting the shares that are included in ethical funds, and is also a public policy interest for us. So I would start by saying that I think this is a great topic to research, because the angle, so in the investment community, there's quite an awareness of the angle that diversity might bring added financial performance to a company, but this question of diversity and the link to sustainability is, I think, a very fruitful area for research, and one that we have been thinking about and are very interested in. We are looking for a diversity of identity on boards, but also looking for boards to increase their environmental and social expertise. And one idea we've posited in discussions with companies is that maybe looking outside the box for candidates with good environmental and social expertise might also help companies to find candidates for the board who are also identity diverse. So this linkage piece I'm really, really very interested in. I have a few questions. Do I go on and answer?
Yeah, please go. Yeah.
Okay. So the thing that maybe other people are interested in too, I'm really interested in the difference between the U.S. and Canada.
Yes.
Yes. Everyone's really interested in that. So very interested just to understand that a little bit better is how, kind of overall, how the companies in the sample, how their sustainability ratings compared amongst the U.S. group and the Canada group. Was there a difference in the way that Sustainalytics rated the U.S. companies and the Canadian companies as groups? I was left this question is the difference because, if the Canadian companies were not performing as well on the sustainability, what does that mean? And if they were performing as well or better on the sustainability, well, does that mean that the Canadian male directors are more attuned to environmental and social issues than, or at a similar level as women as compared to the U.S.? One thing I particularly liked, I think I correctly picked out in the paper, was that the need to ensure that you're not correcting for the sort of the immediacy question. I think I've seen some research, certainly on the linkage between diversity and financial performance, where they kind of looked at what was the sustainability performance at the moment of the women coming onto the board, and absolutely you need to put some lead time in there.
Let's get Jing to respond to the first question about the composition between U.S. and Canada first, and then we'll maybe build on that theme.
Sure.
Did you want to respond to that now, Jing? You're not muted. Jing, can you respond?
Yeah.
Can you respond to the question about the research and whether there's a distinction between the American company's performance and the Canadian company's performance?
Well, there's some difference between U.S. and the Canadian firms' the performance. As you imagine, like in Canada, the performance is actually better than the U.S. So that might explain, and we know that in Canada, the percentage of women, so with better performance and lower percentage of women, I guess that's why I didn't find the significant results in Canada, in Canadian sample.
So we can have a small congratulations to Canadian men for their being slightly more attuned to the E and the S.
Interesting. If you don't mind, I have a follow-on question to that related to the slide on critical mass. So it seemed that there was a sweet spot, if you will, between the 20% being the critical mass sliding up as high as a 40% composition on a board. Jing, I'm wondering, what is the effect of a 50% or a 60%, or were you able to extract any data related to majority boards? I mean, I know maybe I'm talking about a utopia here, but are there any examples, and if so, what's the effect on the management of the organization?
Well, unfortunately, in my data, I didn't see a company with more than 50% of the women on board. So it's difficult for me to test that. But in the future, if there's some company like that, I can definitely measure that and test that. It might be, some interesting finding in the future.
So it's a call to action for corporate Canada to who's going to take a leadership position and have a 50% or a 60% composition board. Leanne, looks like you have a comment.
Well, we know that right now 15.6% of women sit on boards, and there's over 40% of companies, at least on the SP 500 list, that don't even have a woman on their board. Not a single woman. So there are certain industries that certainly do better than others. The utilities, and finance and insurance, we know they're at the higher end, and then partnered on the lower end are mining, oil and gas, and so there's significant differential between even industry-related or unrelated industries, how many women sit on boards. But that number, 15.6%, we've tracked over the last 12 years. It would take right now, at the rate that we're changing, till 2097 for us to see at least parity, which is what you're speaking of, Stephen, on boards. So as Pamela Jeffrey, our founder, was quoted back when she was at the OSC Roundtable in October, we'll be dead. Our children will be dead. And if something doesn't happen, for people to step up and recognize the sizable pool of talent that's available, we really believe it's not a supply issue, it's a demand issue. And a lot of the work that we do, all of the work that we do at the Canadian Board Diversity Council is to that end, to try to raise awareness through the different aspects that we do, advocacy, research, et cetera, to try to help address this.
And so where are you seeing the biggest uptake? Because you cited a couple of industries that are really lagging behind in like having zero composition, zero female representation. Are there any industries that are leading the way, that are setting an example for corporate Canada?
So finance and insurance are leading the way. Yeah. Right behind them are utilities. And so they do really stand above. And retail and trade is up there too. But that's where we see the leaders in industry right now, finance particularly.
Okay, interesting.
I have a follow-on question on the critical mass issue. Hi, it's Kathy speaking. So I was really interested in the results that you found that show that critical mass of 3 women, or at least 20% of the board, had a significant effect on social and environmental performance for the full and the U.S. samples. But in the Canadian sample, it was only 1 woman that made the critical mass to make a difference. So I'm interested in your perspective on that. And also, the other piece of the critical mass is that for environmental performance, no critical mass numbers were found. So I kind of have 2 questions. So one is, again, the difference between the Canadian and the U.S. and the critical mass required to make a difference. And the other piece, the second question is, if you have any sense of why women on the board didn't make that much of a difference on environmental performance separated from social performance.
Great question.
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Kathy. I think for your first question, I guess maybe in Canada, because the history or the structure of the board might be different, or maybe the culture is different. So 1 woman might actually make some difference instead of putting 3, which is fine in the U.S. case. So maybe in Canada, the standards for critical mass is much lower than the U.S. So for the second question, I think, sorry, what's your second question?
So the second question was around how you found that either 1 or 3 women was the critical mass for the social performance, but for environmental performance, no critical mass numbers were found. So I'm wondering, does that mean that having women on the board does not make as much an impact on the environmental performance, but does on the social performance? Or I'm not sure if I'm interpreting that properly, and would just like to get your thoughts and a little more explanation there.
Based on my research about women, like the committee which they sit in, I think most women are put in social-related committees, for example, like HR or society, community-related committees. And if I look at their background and their education, I found like most of them have some social-related backgrounds. And there are very few women which actually have the environmental related background. So I guess the difference is like in current data sample, I think because most of women are put in social related committees and their expertise are more related with social side, that's why I find a very strong results in this with social performance. But for environmental performance, it could be much weaker. And I'm actually doing another research which taking a look at all the women related with environmental expertise. So when the data is ready, I can explain more why there's a difference.
Okay, thank you. So it's Michelle here. So there's one thing that I'd be interested in if you were sort of to look at it in when we're talking about why one woman would make a difference in Canada and you as compared to the sort of critical mass of 3 in the US, I think on the social side, yeah. Did you look at the prevalence of boards having independent chairs in the US and in Canada? Because I'm just wondering whether if you have an independent chair or a split chair CEO situation on the board where there isn't this one very, very powerful figure maybe leading the board who perhaps is both chair and CEO, would that have an impact on what kind of on if you wanted to make a change, then maybe you need more people to have in your critical mass to kind of change the direction of the board than perhaps if you have a board where everyone is an independent where the chair is an independent and the chair is not also the CEO. Do you see what I mean?
Well, whether the chair is independent from the CEO or not, but in my current research setting, I didn't include that as some variable to test, but I can definitely test that and to see whether the results will change or not, and to see whether those companies with more women actually do have an independent chair or not. So that's something I can definitely test. But in current setting, it's not there, yeah.
Anecdotally, I think from a Canadian perspective, culture does change quickly when even one woman does present themselves or they are elected on a board. So I'm not surprised to hear that, frankly, that it does take one to change what would be groupthink and what would be, a more homogeneous board decision-making process. So I can only say anecdotally that we've heard that information does change with one step. We certainly don't want it to stop there, but I wasn't surprised to read that in your research paper.
Do any of the other discussants have questions for Jing with regards to the paper or presentation today?
I have one more.
Fire.
Okay, Jing, it's Kathy speaking again. So I am aware that the GRI, the Global Reporting Index, has the G4, the most recent version, has 18 social indicators that are directly diversity and or human rights measures. So I'm wondering if you looked at the extent to which having women on the board meant that the company was reporting on more of those social indicators that are directly about diversity. Because for me personally, I feel that that's one of the biggest ties where diversity is part of corporate social responsibility, because there are 18 indicators. But not all companies are reporting on all of those indicators. So the GRI says, look, these are important. You know, some companies choose not to report on them. So I was wondering if you looked at the extent to which women being on the board meant that they were reporting on more of those social indicators that are related to diversity and human rights.
I didn't look at that because in my current research, I use the database from Sustainalytics, and at that time when I did my research, the new version of GI was not released. So I can definitely take a look at that. I have all the GI data. I can do that in my future research. Thank you for the suggestion.
The GRI, the G3 had 14 indicators, and the G4 has 18 indicators that are related to diversity and human rights in the workplace. So I think that might be an interesting angle, so I would look forward to seeing the results of that.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Any other questions about the research specifically before we see if we, two things, I want to see some questions from any of the folks online, but also I'd love to hear from the discussants your own personal experiences with composition on boards, the challenges, what are the new opportunities, and maybe a bit of a call to action. What can some of the folks on the phone go back into their own organizations with to arm themselves and say this is how we can influence board composition, maybe even at the practitioner level. But I think that would be kind of an exciting next step. So we'll start with the folks on the phone. So just a bit of tech. So within your Cisco WebEx window, thanks again to Cisco for offering the service in the first place. In the bottom right-hand corner, there is a little Q&A box where you can type in questions, and Stephanie will triage those questions. We'll kind of get into some discussion here now with our discussants, and as those questions come up, we'll read them back so everyone can hear them and try and address those. And I would suggest that you could field those to Jing or to Michelle or Leanne or Kathy. Leave me out of this for now. So we'll leave that there. But I'm wondering, does anyone want to kind of share your experience, or what was your experience on boards as women, but also maybe some other anecdotes, what you've seen in your professional careers and how it's worked and where it's fallen down terribly.
I think it's it's on the tip of everyone's tongue right now. It is a really hot topic to discuss for us. Well, right now the OSC, the Ontario Securities Commission, and also Industry Canada are both addressing it. The federal government has also been led by the Honourable Kelly Leach, Minister of Status of Women, been looking into, what is it that we need to do. And so we've been very vocal on behalf of our membership base and for the research that we provide and the advocacy that we do to respond to the OSC and to Industry Canada, and to give our, with our community and the feedback from there, how are some ways that we can see this change? And a lot of the different criteria could be along the lines of term limits, because right now many boards, they do not have term limits. Policies regarding diversity and how we know there's a direct correlation between companies and organizations that do have a diversity policy and the reflection on their boards. Just considering women in the selection process and in the recruitment process. I need to say, and I know that you did at the beginning for CBDC, it goes beyond gender for us, but this is the first step, and this is what is on the tip of everyone's tongue. We hope that this will go well beyond that, but to start with consideration of the pipeline and sponsorship and really driving towards future change, so that, we are not seeing the glacial pace that we have, and that we have the support of the OSC, of the federal government, of Industry Canada, to see some expectations, mandates, comply and explain, being, something that we are hopeful will come into play. And we really applaud, the OSC, the WIN government, for bringing these to the forefront and allowing us to have conversations like this today.
Did your organization comment on the Canadian Business Corporations Act?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
That's great.
We've commented twice to the OSC, first when they first came out with the back in October, and then to the proposed amendments, which went further than we expected.
Right.
And we wanted to push even a little further. And definitely to Industry Canada. But again, we have the voice of our membership behind us as well, and we want to be the voice at the table for them. So it was fantastic to be able to survey our membership and see, what was their feedback, and then be able to provide that along with recommendations that we see. And so, we did respond to each and every one of those.
Is it sufficient for this to be addressed within human resources, or is, because this is board, it is a governance issue, so it needs to be reflected in both places, but there seems to be a bit of a disconnect there, because there may be a fairly progressive human resources policy, whereas the governance structure is not there to support it. What's going on there?
If I could take that one, it's Kathy. In our experience, most organizations, diversity is housed in the Human Resources Department. That's not necessarily the right place for it to be. Certainly, human resources is greatly impacted, or diversity impacts human resources, vice versa. But many organizations actually house it under corporate social responsibility or governance. And in many organizations, there's a chief diversity officer who has a team that touches all parts of the organization. So it's not just looking at human resources, but also looking at governance, also looking at, the clients and the products and services and all the different ways that diversity impacts everything, because it's not just a human resources issue. And so I think that's an important piece, is recognizing that it is much broader than human resources. And certainly if you're looking at the board, it is more of a governance issue. The other piece of it is, I just wanted to sort of reiterate, is nothing happens unless there's some deliberate action towards it. So having a policy is absolutely necessary, but not just a policy, because we do see a lot of organizations that will have some policy on their website saying, we value diversity,
We're committed to act.
They may have no strategy, no goals, no metrics around it whatsoever. So for companies that are, and here's my call to action, for companies that are dedicated to corporate social responsibility and are doing corporate social responsibility reporting, you already have a mechanism for diversity reporting. And so many people say, oh, it's so hard to measure diversity. Well, if you're already doing CSR reporting, the GRI has all these metrics. So you just need to sort of make the case in your company that diversity needs to be more involved in your CSR initiatives, and so does HR for that matter, because it's often separated. There's a CSR department and the HR department and the diversity department, if there is one at all. But it's all connected, right? And so I think that if you're an organization that's already doing CSR and want to improve diversity within your organization, you already have a mechanism for that. So just put more importance around that, or make people aware that there's all these indicators in the GRI that are directly related to diversity, and that's part of the way you can make the case and push it forward within your organization.
I've actually met a federal minister recently who admitted to me that she will not take meetings with corporations that don't have a woman on her board. And she just made it a policy within her own office. They can meet with someone else within the office, but if you want to get to her, you have to have a composition that reflects her.
A trailblazer.
And I thought that was really exciting and really interesting, but certainly not mandated, not something that's necessarily enforced. Are there examples of companies that have put these rules in place, or even at the government level, where someone has said there must be a percentage of women reflected on your board, or there must be greater diversity on your board, for example, where it's been mandated and it's been effective? I'm curious if there's any global examples of that.
I mean, there's companies that have got board diversity policies and that are
actually do
meeting their targets, actually doing it.
Yeah.
no question about that. I just wanted to actually pick up on something that
Sure.
Kathy was saying that about, it can't just be a human resources issue. Sure, if it's the board, the chair and the nominating committee of the board, they have to be, they've got to buy this. They've got to be involved to make this happen, because they are kind of putting together the candidates for the board. That was just one thought. Another thought that I think is really important is that particularly in the industries that are lagging in getting diversity onto the board, which may be some of the extractive companies, I think there's a real win-win thing here that we were just talking about before the webinar started, that those companies may also actually, they need to get more sustainability expertise onto the boards, and by going out to get look for that sustainability expertise, maybe in some new places, perhaps in academia, other places, they might also find that they are recruiting more diverse, more identity diverse candidates at the same time. So I think that is a big win-win, and that something Leanne mentioned that I think is absolutely critical, that you have to make space for diversity on the board. You can't expand the board continuously. So if people are staying on the board forever, then even if a company would like to make its board more diverse, there has to be room, and that does mean that that people need to go onto the board with an expectation that they're going to spend some time on the board, do some good work on the board, but then perhaps step down from the board. So the whole tenure question is critical, and I think really linked to the diversity question, because no space for new members, no diversity.
Right.
In our research last year, we asked, and we go out to board directors and chairs specifically, and asked how many were open to these changes, including, status quo, comply or explain, and quotas, and 62% are open to change. So they do also think they have diverse boards already, because diversity might not be the same definition that we use, but so that's an education process. But that they're open to seeing that change, that they recognize that the government is also, the different levels of government are seeing that in Industry Canada. I think that there is going to be a movement, and that's our hope. Certainly we're hoping that, our number, as I said, last year, 15.6. By 2015, we're hoping it's 20%. We're hoping the momentum just keeps going, and by 2018, it will be 30%. And we don't really think, with some of the ideas that are being floated, with the potential amendments that are in place or to be put in place, hopefully, that's very possible to achieve. But it's no longer acceptable to have no representation of diversity on board, and that the old boys network, there needs to be change.
So it's an interesting number, because you're saying there's about 15 odd% represented now, but that there is organizations have self-identified at 62% open to the idea?
Open to the idea of comply or explain, and
right.
or basically or quotas. But we don't support quotas. We don't think that they are necessary at this time. We think with some of the other proposed amendments that are on the table, that should be sufficient. We want to make sure that the right people are at the table, and we believe, as I said, it's a demand, not a supply. It's not that there aren't very well-credentialed individuals that could fit some of these roles, and they're not just in HR, and they're not just in the sustainability, and that they are in finance, that there are great individuals that could meet most of the criteria, all the criteria.
So is it those policy changes that are really going to activate that opportunity percentage that you've identified, or are there some other barriers to introducing? I mean, that's an enormous percentage of the corporate population in relation to the people that have actually done something about it? How do we unlock that
We're
potential?
open.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I'm using air quotes.
Yeah, it's kind of vague, and I worry about inaction when people say they're open to things. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. But being open, just it's hopeful.
Right.
It's we know that we need to change the mindset, and if that's happening, then we will continue to track it year over year. We're in the midst of starting our research for 2014, so we'll have more to speak on this in the near future. But just also to see when we go back to the same group, SP 500 directors, so there will be some change as to who is on that, but largely we went out to 3,771 directors last year, and that was our pool. So it's a huge, and we didn't get that response back,
right.
But from the respondents that we did have, that's where our data was drawn from. So what we noticed year over year is we had 30% increase in responses from the directors that we went out to. So if we can continue to see that kind of increase, then we're getting better data and we're understanding more where we need to go. And we're going to just keep out there with our message of how we really do feel that there are some, again, simple changes to corporate policies, governance policies that could make a significant change for the future of what boards look like.
And my understanding is that there's a fairly tight business case behind this as well. Kathy, when you presented earlier this year on diversity and inclusion, I think you had a couple of slides about the mathematics behind this making a lot of business sense for companies.
Oh, just, the changing demographics of the market, it's a very compelling business case. But I wanted to make a point about what you were saying about what's going to compel change.
Okay.
And actually, I would like to commend the CBDC for their submission to the OSC. So the OSC has proposed all these amendments to what corporations would have to report. So the idea there being that if they have to publicly report that they're doing nothing, that's going to be embarrassing. But their reporting requirements is only on their proxy circular. So the CBDC has actually suggested that they be required to not just report it on the proxy circular, but also on their website and their annual report. So that would be more accessible to the public, right? So I hope the OSC picks up that suggestion from the CBDC, because that's not a huge change in what they're suggesting, but it would definitely make that information about what companies are doing or not doing more accessible to the public and might actually provide more public pressure on companies once more people have access to that information. So,
Kathy, you mean not everybody rushes to read the proxy circular of a company?
I don't think I've ever read a proxy circular.
Michelle, as NEI is evaluating companies, and specifically companies that are performing well as good corporate citizens, is there a direct correlation between the composition of their boards and their performance?
Yes. I mean, I think, Jing picked up on it in her research. I mean, there seems to be a very strong consensus that when you start to get diversity on the board, that there does seem to be a correlation with the firm performance. I have to say one thing: in evaluating companies for inclusion in ethical funds, we have talked many times about, should we not include companies that have no diversity on the board? At this stage, we literally could not do that because we would reduce the ethical funds universe to such a small group. It would actually be very difficult to run a fund at the right risk level with such a small universe, though it might actually be quite a high-performing fund, of course. But that is something we go back to frequently when we're sort of upgrading the evaluation framework. Hopefully we'll get to a stage where, in the not-too-distant future, where we can actually make this an evaluation criteria for the funds, because it will be much more widespread that there will be some diversity at most companies. Yeah.
So we actually have a question online for Jing, so I wanted to get that in before the end of before we get close to the end here, because we are getting close to the hour. So one of the questions that came in was, I wondered if if you could expand a little bit on the results by industry, and maybe Leanne, you have some comments on that. Do you have any explanation, or can you further sort of expand on why there is such a disparity between individual industries, and maybe why, say, finance and insurance is leading the way, whereas maybe the extractive sector has a ways to go? Is there some research behind that, or some data behind that as to why that might be?
Thank you for the information. I think I have the industry in my data set, and I'm actually working on that. I try to split it into like resource or environmental sensitive industries like mining, oil, gas, this kind of industry, and the other industry which are not very environmental sensitive like finance or insurance. So I try to see the difference, and I'm still working on that. So it could be a very interesting direction, and I might find something very interesting when I split them by industry.
Yeah, we would love to share that further information with our members and stakeholders and perhaps the participants on this call. So we'll keep the conversation going, and hopefully we can share whatever you're willing to share with everyone else. Did you have a quick comment on that as well, Leanne? I'm just curious about that. And my assumption might be the professions that are like the engineering focus. Now we're trying to encourage more women to get into the profession of engineering, and I know in the mining and oil and gas sector there's a heavy domination from the engineering field.
There's definitely a feeling that women aren't as involved in the STEM industries.
Right.
So that's changed. That's hopefully changing, and we're definitely seeing more of that. But I think that it really comes back down to some traditional stereotypes, and in terms of some of the ones that are on the lower end of the spectrum. You know, agriculture, forestry and fishing, hunting is also there, waste management. So those are the ones that are further down on the list. I could include construction there as well. So it does kind of give you a visual, and it doesn't feel like a female oriented industry, but you know, you meet people like Maureen Jensen from Ontario Securities Commission, who has a mining background,
right.
And you realize that you know there are fabulous women who have played leading roles in these areas, and it's not just tradition. It's going outside of networks. It's back to what we know is true. To make the change, you have to look outside of that old, you know, that group that you go to time and time again, and expand your search outside of the pool that you look at if you're in that kind of a scenario.
And there's such stereotypes built in there, because one of the first inductees into the Mining Hall of Fame was a woman, and she actually co-founded the PDAC organization in the first place. So that goes way back. That was like last week. I mean, that's forever. Yeah.
Maureen jumped to mind because we were talking about Ontario Securities Commission. So, but there are many more, and we hope to see that trend continue.
That's great. Any last questions from online, Steph?
We're good for questions.
We're good for questions. Jing, I want to give the last word to you. Do you have any actually questions for the discussants in the room here, or any final comments? I want to really thank you for presenting your research today.
Everybody for listening to my presentation, and I will offer you the future results of my research, such as research by industry, the research related with GI. So if you want to share with your members, I'm very happy to do that.
Yeah, we're gonna keep the focus on this topic. Yeah, as you've said, Leanne, it's a hot topic. I mean, it deserves to be a hot topic, so we're going to keep the pressure on. So that would be wonderful if we could share that with our members and our broader supporters. That'd be very generous of you. Thank you. So thank you to those of you in the room as well today. Kathy, Leanne, Michelle. Thanks, Steph, for putting this together, and thanks again to CBERN for helping us and for co-hosting and for partnering with us on these events. We have how many more coming up? Two more research direction sessions, maybe 3, over the next few months. So keep an eye on CBSR.ca for that. Thanks again to Cisco for donating the WebEx service to CBSR, so we can put these on free of charge. And thanks for all of you that joined the call today and submitted questions. I appreciate it. If there are any follow-up questions that we didn't get to or for whatever reason you weren't able to submit, please email us directly either at info@cbsr.ca or perhaps to Stephanie. I think her link is there in the registration. Yeah, and I think there's a follow-up survey coming for those of you on the webinar, so if you can provide your feedback on how this went today, that's most helpful, so we can keep continuous improvements. So, thanks everyone, and until next time.
Thank you. Great. Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.